There he is! Get him! Get him! There you go, let him get away! You're gonna run that corner, get that guy! Come on! Get that guy!
I think they're gone. Gracious. I didn't think this whole stealth thing was gonna be so difficult. Control, if you're paying attention to my last transmission, you may have noticed my anecdote about getting caught trying to sneak chocolate milk, and honestly, I wasn't joking. I'm not cut out for this stuff. Maybe if I explored the history of stealth, I can figure out how to do this a little more successfully. Better make this quick. It's real stinky in here. Stealth can originally be traced back to the concept of espionage, or clandestine infiltration of enemy ranks to learn information about their plots, size of army, or perhaps even strategies they may employ. This concept can be seen in literature as far back as the book Art of War. What was it I said in my last transmission? Sun Tzu in his book Art of War said, "One who knows the enemy and knows himself will not be endangered in 100 engagements." Oh right, Sun Tzu, the guy that wrote every warmongering 14-year-old's favorite book that they've never read. So that puts the start of the documentation of stealth as a war tactic at around 500 BC. But stealth in games isn't quite what it is in real life. For a lot of reasons, stealth isn't really possible in real life like it is in most stealth games. I do still have some info about real life stealth that I can discuss though. Firstly, a great example of video game stealth in real life comes to us from the context of, you guessed it, war. Sniper crews use stealth all the time to get a better scope on the enemy target, things like that. One particularly interesting example of this is with Carlos Hathcock, a US Marine sniper with a service record of 93 confirmed kills. The PAVN and Viet Cong called Hathcock Long Trang, which is translated as white feather sniper for the white feather he wore in his cap. Our first instance of a form of stealth can be found when a platoon of Vietnamese soldiers were dispatched to take out White Feather. Many Marines also wore macaroni to keep the enemy from knowing who the real target was, allowing Hathcock to hide in plain sight. The second case of stealth in his story takes place when he crawled over 1,500 yards to take out a PAVN general. 4 days and 3 nights of crawling, painstakingly covering inches of ground at a time, all without sleep, and ending in him killing the general in a single well-placed shot. Hathcock says that he was, at one point, almost stepped on by an enemy soldier as he lay camouflaged in the brush, and he was almost bitten by a bamboo viper, an incredibly deadly denizen of Vietnam, but didn't move, in order to avoid giving away his position. Yeah, needless to say, he went home after that mission. I'm so impressed by this guy that I couldn't even really think of how to write a joke into his story, except for the fact that his name kind of sounds like a medieval knight is making sure you know that Carlos is 100% man. In nature, stealth is much more common. Some animal species are even built with stealth and solo hunting in mind, one of the most prominent being the feline. Every inch of their body is designed for stealth, similar to how every inch of my body is designed for Mexican food. There are of course other stealthy species of animals like snakes, bats, raccoons, and of course the mascot of Clandestine, the fox, or as I like to call him, the cat dog. In 2018, a company called Scrap made an escape room-esque game based off of the Metal Gear series. It involved puzzles, actual stealth with actual guards that walked along predetermined predictable paths, a codec, clever ways to play the system, and even a prop gun that you could use to hold up guards in order to get items from them. Maybe the most incredible thing about this game is the attention to detail with the MGS series. There are cardboard boxes that you can hide in, lockers that you can get in and peek out through, and even a story twist in the third act. That seems really above and beyond the call to me, but many points for the creativity. It sadly closed in March of 2019, but Scrap tends to reopen their attractions periodically, so it may be an extra reason to finally go if you've been planning a future trip to Tokyo. Anyway, enough about that stuff. Let's talk about stealth in video games. A stealth game, or sneak 'em up, is a genre of video game in which the player is encouraged to avoid enemies rather than fight them head on. It's the perfect kind of game for the kind of person I am, generally afraid of human contact. Oftentimes, your player character can't really survive a head-on firefight, and especially not against a horde of enemies. This is also perfect for me, as I can relate to being generally weaker than most people in any given room. Getting caught is at best a minor setback, and at worst a death sentence in most stealth games, so you have to employ your wits and cunning to outsmart or outmaneuver the enemies. Before I talk about specific examples, let's take a look at some general things. I believe that every stealth game falls under two categories: camouflage stealth and line of sight stealth. Some games blend the two or have inversions of the format, but those are the two most common groundworks for a stealth game. Line of sight stealth is pretty simple. If you're in the enemy's line of sight, they see you and raise an alert. A lot of older stealth games are representative of this, probably because the technology back then was barely able to handle a handful of enemies at once, much less computing whether or not the ground you're standing on is the same color as your clothes and therefore makes you less visible. Good examples of this are the old Metal Gear games, Sly Cooper, stuff like that. Oftentimes the enemies will have pretty clear lines of sight to make it a little more intuitive and less cheap on the computer's part. Camo Stealth involves another element in which, given specific circumstances, enemies can be looking right at you and even be right on top of you and still not see you, due to some sort of camo system. The most obvious being the camo index from MGS3, and also apparently some contemporaries, and less obvious being things like Thief, in which standing in certain places, in this case the shadows, renders you effectively invisible. The biggest difference between these two systems is that the games that use them are designed in wildly different ways. The expectation in line-of-sight stealth games is that, when the enemy turns their back, you'll have enough time to knock them out from the nearest obviously safe position, or at least move around them. This can be really easily seen in Sly Cooper. With Camo Stealth, that goes out the window in favor of needing to use your camo to your advantage, pulling guys into the shadows as much as you can rather than putting yourself in danger by going out into the light. They also often have much less forgiving lines of sight for the enemies, and many of them don't show the lines of sight at all, kind of as a form of punishment for leaving your hiding spot at the wrong time. Most modern games are a combination of the two. You're never invisible for what it's worth, but hiding in shadow or tall grass will make you moderately harder to see, if not impossible. Not much else to do except jump right into the timeline, and believe it or not, Metal Gear for the MSX2 was not the first stealth game, even though it is commonly cited as such. That title much more likely goes to Shoplifting Boy, developed by Hiroshi Suzuki in 1979. It's a primitive game to say the least, but not far off from what you would expect on an Atari or something like that. You play as a boy, a shoplifting boy, if you will, walking through a store stealing dollar signs off of shelves. The goal is to collect them all without getting spotted by the shopkeeper. It's archaic, but kind of neat. You even have a second to escape if you do get spotted before you get thrown in jail. After that, the first stealth game that is perhaps even slightly known is Castle Wolfenstein, developed for the Apple II by Muse, released in 1981. Yes, that Wolfenstein, yes, that Apple, and no, not that Muse. Your goal was to steal into a Nazi war camp, take their plans, and get out. Sounds kind of familiar, though I'm not sure why. It involves a lot of precursors to the Hitman series. Taking out and impersonating Nazi soldiers is a large part of the gameplay. For its time, it's fairly robust, with an impressively large amount of stuff that you can do throughout. It was succeeded by a sequel, Beyond Castle Wolfenstein, which took those gameplay elements and continued to add depth to them, a feat that is very impressive for 1984. Next up, we've got the poster child itself, Metal Gear, developed by Konami and directed by the man of the hour, Hideo Kojima, the most influential man in the games industry.
Kojima is God. Kojima is God.
It drops you into the setting of a military base called Outer Heaven, tasked with destroying the superweapon being developed there. While the gameplay is certainly archaic and it's plagued with some of the NES era issues that exist in a lot of games of that time, a lot of the genre-defining mechanics used in this game are still in use to this day. For example, the game was originally planned to be a Contra-esque run and gunner, but when it was found that the MSX2 couldn't handle more than a handful of bodies on screen at one time, Kojima decided to retool the game to be about avoiding enemies rather than taking them out. This means that, just like modern stealth games, you can't really handle yourself in a head-on firefight, and have to use your cunning, wits, and the tools at your disposal to get through the game. Enemies have a vision cone that is akin to a straight line, making the stealth fairly easy if you abuse this fact. There are numerous different items you can use, but perhaps the most important is the cardboard box, which you can hide underneath. It essentially functions as a portable hiding spot. It's far from a perfect game, and suffers from God dang it pretty consistently, but overall is pretty fun. I would say that that's a testament to the design of the game, as well as the beauty of the genre-defining characteristics that were born here. The game never puts you into a situation in which you walk through one screen into another only to get immediately spotted, meaning a lot of time went into making sure the primary gameplay loop is satisfying and fun. This, I believe, did set a standard of the quality of guard patrols and enemy AI that continues to this day to avoid frustrations in what has the potential to be a very stressful and frustrating genre. A port for the NES came out in 1988, and it does not share a lot of the things that made Metal Gear a good and influential game, because it was designed by an American team and may as well be a different game. This is unfortunately a trend for Metal Gear until the 3D era. Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake came out in 1990 and sought to improve on the first game in every way, and I would say it succeeded in all but one category. The gameplay is largely improved. In the first game, if you got spotted and left the room, the alert would go away and items would respawn as well, making the stealth a little less consequential, but not in this game. You either have to clear the area or hide for long enough. Enemy vision cones have expanded to a much wider arc, making the enemies a lot less cheesable. You have a radar now, and binoculars allow you to see into any of the 8 rooms adjacent to the one you're in. You can crawl, a mechanic still in use to this day, and the use of this is important for getting through the game stealthily. The cardboard box returns and has added functionality, most notably being the ability to fast travel around the map with it. I think one of the coolest things that this game does is make strides toward personifying the enemy soldiers. There are numerous areas such as bathrooms, cafeterias, living quarters, and things like that, which serve to help to give the enemy some humanity. The game came out when games were rarely even a logical progression of realistic platforms and rooms, much less rooms that are specifically designed to feel lived in by the people you are combating. The stealth genre lends itself to this, as your goal isn't to indiscriminately slaughter the enemy, but leaving everyone alive is almost always an option. So humanizing the enemies doesn't detract from the core gameplay loop, it actually serves it well. The one place where this game doesn't really improve is in the guide dang it sections. There's some absolutely cuckoo logic in this one, not the least of which being the egg that hatches into an owl, which you show to a guard to make him think it's nighttime so he'll shut off the lasers leading into the next area. The solution is more telegraphed than I just made it sound, but only marginally. Metal Gear 2 wouldn't make it to the States until 2005, but a sequel to the NES port would be released, dropping the Metal Gear moniker and just being called Snake's Revenge. It's bad, and barely a stealth game, so that's as much time as I'm gonna give it. The stealth genre was silent for a while after Metal Gear 2, most likely because it was hard to innovate on the formula that it set with the technology available at the time. That is until 1998, when the single most influential year for the stealth genre came to be, with 3 huge contributors coming out at relatively the same time. The first stealth game to come out that year was Tenchu, Stealth Assassins. It featured a third-person camera, stealth takedowns with animations, different items you can use to cause distractions and eliminate targets, and an emphasis on verticality and using rooftops to your advantage. I haven't played it myself, and it looks like I won't be able to, but I read a fairly poignant article on PlayStationLifestyle.com, which gives me a lot of insight into the legacy of the game and how it holds up today. I'm not going to speak much more on it because I don't want to do it injustice, but go read that article if you're interested. Next up is Metal Gear Solid on September 3rd. Functionally, the game is practically just an upgraded version of the gameplay from Metal Gear 2. Unlike Tenchu, there's no verticality involved in the stealth. It's all about avoiding the enemy's line of sight, which is handily displayed for you on the radar at the upper right hand of the screen. The camera doesn't follow you in the same way as Tenchu. It kind of hangs above your head, showing off an unnervingly small amount of the room, so use of the radar is the easiest way to keep a bead on your enemies. If you get spotted, the radar gets jammed, so avoiding the enemy is imperative if you want to not have a bad time. There are guns you can shoot, puzzles to solve, bosses to beat, items to find, security systems to avoid, more than one cardboard box, and people to talk to. Yes, a lot of people to talk to. Or, at the very least, a lot of words to say to them. This game continues Metal Gear 2's use of humanizing enemies, giving villains distinct motives, and even making them empathetic at times, as well as twisting the player's expectations throughout. More on this game's impact on the medium later. Then we got Thief, the Dark Project. You play as wisecracking Robin Hood, a thief who steals from the rich and gives to the poor. Wait, wrong guy. You play as Garrett, a wisecracking thief who steals from the rich and mostly doesn't give to the poor, unless you count Garrett under that umbrella, but he also aims to subtly overthrow people of power, corrupting the city throughout his mission. The game is, from what I can tell, the first stealth game played in the first-person perspective, as well as the first stealth game to use a system of camouflage to make Garrett invisible. The light gem at the bottom of the screen indicates the amount of light you are currently in. When it's bright, you are visible and enemies can easily see you. When it's dark, you are invisible and enemies practically have to bump into you to find you. Sound plays a big part in the stealth. There are a lot of surfaces that will make your footfalls much louder, and you are cautioned to avoid or diffuse them through other means. You have a blackjack, which can non-lethally take down enemies, which is also possibly a first for the genre, but they get back up after a while so you can't screw around too much. You have a sword, but God help you if you need to use it, because Garrett is possibly the weakest stealth hero in any stealth game to this date. Not only is he weak, but the combat is deliberately designed to be difficult to pull off, making the stealth entirely necessary. Even when you can successfully kill people, the blood they spill will likely cause other guards to notice the carnage and enact an all-out manhunt. The other big tool at your disposal is your bow and arrow, and this is where a lot of the innovation in this game comes in. The bow can be used to fire numerous different arrows. The most basic is the regular pointy arrow that you kill things with. The second and possibly most interesting is the water arrow. These are used throughout the game to put out lights, giving you more darkness to work with. Enemies can notice this though and will likely investigate. Another arrow is the rope arrow, which you can launch at wooden surfaces to create a climbable rope to get up higher. This increases your vertical capability, opening up alternate pathways through the levels. The last arrow is the moss arrow, which can be used on loud floors to muffle your footsteps. The moss pile it leaves behind is so comically small that it usually requires some bunny hopping to use efficiently. Each of these arrows and tools you have are intrinsic to the choose your path style of gameplay that this game pioneered. Most levels, except for the shoehorned zombie combat levels, have multiple ways to enter and exit from. The one thing that limits your ability to use pathways is your money and resource conservation skills. The whole game is about making money by stealing valuable items. Did I need to explain that? I mean, it's called Thief. You can use the money you make to stock up on items to use in your next excursion. If you care more about utility than combat, you can choose to avoid purchasing hardpoint arrows in favor of moss or rope arrows. The way and frequency with which you use these items can cause situations where you wish you had conserved more earlier. The levels are large and sprawling, with plenty of optional nooks and crannies to be searched for gold and arrows, rewarding your explorations with more tools to use throughout the levels. 1998 is unequivocally the most influential year in stealth gaming history. 3 enormous games came out in that genre, each defining 3D stealth in a unique way that continues to influence the genre to this day. But I'm interested in seeing if one of these games has more influence over the medium than any other, so I will be judging the following games by their similarity to the design and mechanics of one of the pioneers of 1998. I'm excluding Tenchu, so it's very, very possible that some of these games can and will be more similar to that game than Thief or Metal Gear Solid. But since I haven't played it, and since Thief is already much more similar to Tenchu than NGS, I will count Tenchu and Thief as the same thing for the list. At the end, I will discuss the results. It should be interesting. One whole year passes without a new game in the genre until Hitman Codename 47 comes out in the year 2000. This game features a fairly Thief-esque approach to stealth. You get money for being stealthy and handling your assassination mission with professionalism, but money is deducted if you do the opposite, such as killing civilians. That money can be used to purchase weapons and ammo, giving it similar characteristics to the money in Thief. It uses a disguise system in which Agent 47 can use the clothing of anyone that he eliminates, but should that body be found, the disguise will be ruined and the enemies will be privy to it. This is the main way you are expected to traverse through the game, using disguises throughout to make sure no one suspects you as you set up your assassinations. Later in 2000 comes Deus Ex. Deus Ex isn't really a stealth game, it's an immersive sim, which often has heavy stealth elements, a focus on player choice, and many different RPG elements as well. Thief is also kind of a pioneer for this genre. Unlike Thief and a lot of other games in this list, the stealth, just like everything in Deus Ex, is governed by the RPG-esque progression system, meaning that you'll be better at hiding if your stealth stat is higher. That's why I'm not particularly interested in talking about immersive sins in this discussion. While a lot of them do have stealth elements, I believe that the stealth is just another part of a larger weave of game mechanics that make up the gameplay loop. The stealth isn't the forefront, so I will save them for another time. In 2001, we got Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. Point goes to Metal Gear Solid. Yeah, I'm gonna count sequels. This game plays very similarly to the first game, but it does have some improvements. You can now hold up guards by pointing your gun at them, movement is more fluid, many items make a return along with some new ones, and the radar is back, although less omnipresent this time around. You have to go to a node.
Did you say nerd?
To turn on the radar, meaning that your spatial and situational awareness is more important this time around. Use of the first-person camera is almost necessary, especially the first time you enter a zone. New to the series and long-running staple is the Tranquilizer Pistol, a gun that shoots tranquilizer darts, which non-lethally incapacitate enemies. The area of the body that you hit is significant for the amount of time it will take for the enemy to fall asleep. Extremities take a significant amount of time, torso takes less time, and headshots are instant, as well as the buttocks and the crotch, depending on the game. Enemies put to sleep are significantly more agreeable than dead ones. While they do wake up after a time, they don't raise an alert when they do, and enemies finding sleeping guards also won't raise an alert. They'll simply wake them up and move on with life. Enemies no longer immediately raise an alert when you get spotted, softening some of the blow from the fact that the radar isn't always there. Instead, they now have to radio into a central dispatch, meaning you have time to take them out before they raise an alert this time. While that is good news, the bad news is that if you get an alert, a SWAT team of specialized troops bursts into the zone, making your life much less fun. The game retains its linearity and much of its level design from the first game, meaning your player choice is simply in how you decide to interact with guards, and to that extent, your three options are essentially ghost, lethal, and non-lethal, and you will likely switch between the three depending on the situation unless you're doing a specific playthrough. Most rooms do have multiple pathways, and I put that in very large quotations because there are at best like 2 viable pathways in each room, and they usually boil down to go left or go right. There's nothing wrong with any of this. It's significant because it shows this series retaining its identity as others began to follow in the mold set by its competitors. The subtitle of each of these games is Tactical Espionage Action, the important operating word here being action. They were meant to be action stealth games, keeping the pace and excitement up as much as possible throughout, and as much as I love Thief and the immersive sim style of stealth, it doesn't lend itself to a constant sense of action or danger. You spend a lot of time surveying situations, planning moves, then executing them. MGS has always been about execution, not so much about planning. Ah, sweet. Sly Cooper. I think this game was pretty influential in my love of stealth games. Sly Cooper is a stealth platformer seeing you as Sly Cooper globe-trotting his way through bad guys to recover his family's book. The gameplay is a mix of 3D platforming and stealth, one of the primary things involving avoiding guards with flashlights and security systems. There are abilities you can get throughout the game that make certain things easier, but for the most part, it's you and your cane against the world. This game is special to me because it was my first stealth game, and while the stealth is light and fairly surface level, I really think it is incredibly well designed even today. I was gonna park here for a while and talk about all the really interesting stealth mechanics in this game, but decided against it for time, but just know that Sly Cooper is great and you should check it out at some time. Also, if I was gonna force myself to give a point to one of the pioneers for this one, it would be Tenchu for its verticality, although this game looks and feels nothing like any of those games and is obviously much more akin to Super Mario 64 and the like. Next up on the line is the first Splinter Cell, a long-standing stealth series. The game features its own light gem-esque system, as well as many other mechanics, such as gadget usage, dispatching enemies, the works. A big emphasis is put on hiding the bodies so others won't spot them, as well as sticking to the shadows to avoid being spotted in the first place. Then there's Metal Gear Solid 3, Snake Eater, and the re-release of Subsistence in 2005. This love letter to Bond film sees you traipsing through the jungle in camo fatigues, hunting for food and avoiding guards, occasionally disguising yourself to get through undetected, and of course, hiding under cardboard boxes. The premise of this game is actually what serves all of the innovations present here, and that premise is this. You're on one big week-long mission in the jungle. What does that mean for you as a player, and for our main character? Well, it means you have to hunt, first and foremost. Your stamina meter constantly drains, draining even faster if you were doing more labor-intensive things like running around or swimming. If it gets low enough, it actually affects your ability to shoot, and Snake's stomach will growl occasionally, potentially alerting nearby guards if you're unlucky enough. So hunting throughout the game is necessary most of the time. A big change to the game is the CQC system, which plays into the gameplay and story. In-game, you use the system to interrogate guards, choke them out, use them as body shield, throw them around, and all this in addition to the hold-up mechanic which has returned from MGS2. This feels significant because you're in enemy territory with little to no information about the area you are in. Interrogating guards feels like a logical thing for Snake to want to do. Story-wise, you actually will likely see Snake grow in his ability to CQC as the player does, which is really interesting and the kind of stuff you would expect from MGS at this point, probably. The Camo System has 2 parts, the Camo Index and the Camouflage screen in the pause menu. Your Camo Index goes up or down depending on what you're doing. Run around like a loony and it'll drop like a rock, whereas hiding in tall grass will make it rise up, and the closer to 100%, the harder you are to see. To further increase the camo index, you have to wear the right camo for the area you are in. All your camos are kept in a menu that you can access by pausing the game, and each camo shows how much you will improve or degrade the camo index before you leave the menu. This is also where you do things like curing wounds, eating food, and selecting your inventory, the weight of which will also cause your stamina to drain more or less quickly. Thanks to the Camo System, most areas of the game are very wide open, and without the radar, your spatial and situational awareness are more important than ever. The problem is that the game originally shipped with essentially the same camera as MGS 1 and 2, meaning you would often get spotted from off-camera in a way that felt unfair. So in 2005, they re-released the game with a controllable third-person camera, bringing the game up to speed with its competitors. This made the game feel much more organic, allowed for much more awareness, and significantly inspired the rest of the series. Next up, we've got... Hold on. I think everyone's gone now. I should probably make my move, but how can I keep myself hidden? Stealth can originally be traced back to the concept every inch of their body is designed for stealth, similar to how every inch of my body is designed. You play as a boy, a shoplifting boy. There are numerous different items you can use. Cardboard box returns and has added functionality. More than one cardboard box. Cardboard box. Is there? Yes. Yes, there's one right here. Let me just fold it out. I mean, it's a little smelly, but I think it's gonna work. I'm going radio silent. Be back in just a minute. I managed to make it into an air vent. I'm crawling through the center of the base right now. Let's see if I can... this guy looks important. It looks like he's interrogating someone. I'm gonna hook up my shotgun mic. Let's have a listen. Here we are again. Do you know why we're here?
Yes, sir.
It's the third time this week we've had to go over this, is it not?
Yes, sir.
And you are aware of the consequences?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to explain myself one more time on this matter, and if we have to see each other again like this, it'll be the last time we see each other at all.
Yes, sir.
When I say something, you are to follow my instructions to the letter. No creative freedoms, no mistakes, no questions asked. My whole life has been building up to this point. I've finally gotten somewhere, and I am not going to let that be ruined by your incessant screw-ups. This is the last time. The last time I will tolerate this. If 2 days from now I give you this command again, and I even see 1 ounce of sour cream on my tacos, I will send you to the cell block along with the hostage, and you can get to know him real personally when I strap you both to a pole and pour sour cream down your throats.
Yes, sir.
Wow, I hope she's okay. Well, I know there's a hostage down in the cell block now. I can see a sign on the wall from the vent here. It says cell block is somewhere in the basement. Now I just have to figure out how to get down there. I'm gonna need some time. I'm terminating the transmission. Be back soon.